Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Laura, this is Culture Nonsense, and if you are returning, thank you so much. If you're new, like this video if you like it, and subscribe to the channel if it's interesting content. I'm really appreciative of all of you who even just watch the videos and engage with me in the comments. Really great. So today we are here to dive into a week 9 recap of the Theranos trial. So this covers 3 days of testimony, November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th from last week. And just as a future note to all of you guys, I'm going to keep doing these updates every Tuesday from now on until the end of the trial. So if you like this video or want to go back to the beginning and watch from early September when I started, I'm going to link that up here. Without further ado though, let's get into this. So the trial picked back up on Tuesday with more testimony from Lisa Peterson. And if you didn't watch my video where we talked about her first part of the testimony, that's right here. So she managed the DeVos family investment in Theranos. So I believe we started with the cross-examination of her. So Wade, a defense attorney, kept asking her questions, which were kind of meant to trap her over prior comments that she'd given, I believe, in a deposition. And she kept trying to offer more detailed answers to kind of explain her points. And Wade kept striking her answers from the record. It actually got a little contentious. And I guess after striking at least 5, the judge kind of scolded him and said that some of your questions lend themselves to a further explanation. But the judge also told Ms. Peterson to just wait for the lawyer's questions because they kept getting into this issue of her kind of talking out of bounds of the question and them having to strike it, and a lot of contentious back and forth, like I said. So an interesting piece of information that we learned this past week is that in October of 2014, Theranos provided RDV, which is the DeVos firm, revenue projections for the year, and they said that it would do $140 million in revenue for the year of 2014. And it turned out to be zero. Their revenue for 2014 was zero. So prosecutor Robert Leach is asking Ms. Peterson, did you in any way dream that revenue for the year would be zero? And she says, no. Projections should be somewhat close. And this is true. The defense has tried to say, projections are, can be somewhat rosy. It's what you hope for the future. However, the fact that this was October, 2 months before the end of the year, it should have been closer to the actual number. If you're at the end of the year at October and you have $0 and you say in 2 months we're going to make $140 million, that just seems to be straight up misleading to me because there's almost no way you could make up that money in that time, especially if you've made nothing up until that point. Further, Theranos told investors that it would have $990 million in revenue in 2015, and the real number was less than 500,000. So again, even for the next year, the projection was ridiculously low. Ms. Peterson said that Theranos justified its 2015 forecast with the explanation that it would have blood testing centers in more than 900 Walgreens stores and 300 Safeway stores. And as we know, this didn't happen. Theranos ended up having testing locations in 40 Walgreens stores and was never launched in Safeway. So that's, one of the reasons why the projection didn't reach that. But, even for it to just be somewhat close would have been more desirable instead of the actual revenue it ended up being. So another weird thing that happened is that court was interrupted for the day for a bit because someone showed up and tried to take a picture of the proceedings, and this is not allowed in the courthouse. You're not allowed to take pictures, videos, anything like that. And so he actually came up and the judge chastised him for it, and the picture was deleted. The next witness brought to the stand is Constance Cullen, and she worked for Schering-Plough, another pharmaceutical company. Schering-Plough asked her to participate in evaluating Theranos' technology, and so they beta tested a few machines, and she visited Theranos' offices. So she testified that she had been unimpressed with Theranos and found Ms. Holmes a bit cagey during her process of evaluating the startup's technology for a possible partnership. So she said that she had many questions and was dissatisfied, quite honestly, with the response to the questions. She added that there was no direct answers to questions and that questions were fairly technical, so the answer should also be fairly technical and direct. There were what I describe as cagey responses or attempts to redirect to other topics of discussion. Again, we've seen Elizabeth do this many times in the past where she, tries to pivot or provides vague explanations. Apparently, despite this, Theranos put Schering-Plough's logo on a document it later gave to a prospective business partner and investor, purporting that the pharmaceutical company had checked out and validated its blood testing devices. Colin says that she did not agree with the report's conclusion and that no one at Schering-Plough said the documents were accurate. So again, not only once with Pfizer, but twice, Theranos now has provided doctored documents from pharmaceutical companies saying that everything's a-okay, and they provided this to their investors. So they might have been able to get away with it once, but twice is very bad. So I guess one of the defense attorneys asked about the validation work, and as Colin said, that it hit the requirements, but at the end of the day, the execution would not have been in alignment with FDA requirements for validation, and her contact with Elizabeth Holmes kind of cut off at some point. So things essentially fizzled, and Theranos took this as an excuse to just put their logo on a document saying everything was a-okay. The defense, again, didn't really even touch the doctored document piece of testimony because there's really no defense against it, so they just kind of pretended like it didn't exist. The next witness was Dan Mosley, and he was a lawyer, and he invested $6 million personally in Theranos after one of his clients, Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, introduced him to Theranos. So Mr. Mosley testified that he had introduced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes to several of his clients, including the Walton family, who control Walmart, the DeVos family, the Cox family, and they control media and automotive. Cox Enterprises, a Greek shipping heir, Andreas Drakopoulos, great name. So they became some of Theranos' biggest investors, and I believe all these people put together had something like over $300 million put into the investing round in 2014 to 2015. Mr. Mosley testified that he decided to invest in Theranos because he thought it was something that was good for everybody, based on the startup's plan to make blood tests cheaper, more widely available, and less invasive. And again, we run through this kind of same set of questions that the prosecution asks about, listing specific and clear promises Theranos made to its investors about the technology and having the investors testify that they invested based on the information they were given. So Mr. Mosley said he recognized that there were inherent risks in the investment because it was a new technology, but he also said he didn't think a risk was inaccurate information. Mr. Mosley also facilitated the funding round by circulating confidential disclosure agreements to his clients on behalf of Ms. Holmes, who mandated that investors keep all information secret. And that's not actually too uncommon with these types of companies with proprietary information. So Mr. Mosley testified that he liked Elizabeth Holmes, and he said she obviously was a visionary that had created the company and developed the technology, and having her in control of the company was a good thing. This again undercuts the idea that, Elizabeth had nothing to do with all of this and had no idea. Her face and her involvement is the reason a lot of people invested. So now we move on to Wednesday, and we get to the cross-examination of Mr. Mosley. He was questioned a lot about the due diligence efforts that he did, and it seemed in some of the defense's questioning, because, he connected so many people with Theranos, they tried to maybe push the idea that he was the person who kind of led all these people to believe claims about Theranos that weren't true, but he was really just passing along information from Theranos itself to these people. Yes, he was very supportive, and yes, he said, this is a great thing, maybe you guys should think about investing, but, any information that he passed along was information that he would have gotten from Theranos. He wasn't the one making up claims, it was Theranos the whole time. Interestingly enough, they also hit on a memo that he prepared for Henry Kissinger. So this memo was talking about those revenue projections like I mentioned earlier. So he's asking that, it would be helpful to know the basis of these estimates. Much of the growth that Theranos forecasted was based on the assumption that the startup would significantly expand those retail blood testing centers, jumping from 30 drugstores to 900 drugstores. And of course, we know, like I said, that didn't happen. So Mr. Mosley acknowledged in his memo that Theranos' $8.8 billion valuation at this stage might seem high. He added that the two majorly publicly traded diagnostic companies, Laboratory Corp of America and Quest Diagnostics, were valued roughly the same. So Mr. Mosley concluded that the validation could be justified by the $990 million revenue in 2015, even if that projection seemed ambitious. So he said it certainly did have risk and it was certainly possible to lose all your money. But again, he believed that they were a lot further along in the technology and, getting these machines in stores. So it's interesting that he had this little kernel of, wow, that valuation seems pretty high, but I mean, I guess if they can justify it with the revenue, it might be worth it. But as we know, that revenue never happened. The Pfizer document was brought up once again, and Mr. Mosley did testify that this was one of the reasons why he wanted to invest. Another thing that was interesting from the trial on Wednesday was that the judge expressed annoyance at the pace of questioning by Ms. Holmes' lawyers. And so I guess they've taken longer again and again to examine government witnesses than the prosecutors. The judge said, "You said that we were going to finish with this witness by the end of the day." And he's talking to Lance Wade, an attorney for Ms. Holmes. And he said, "Yeah, I think my hope is that we'll be in a position to do that." The defense questions are just taking a very long time, and the judge is annoyed with that because the trial is running long as it is. So getting to Thursday, another interesting thing that happened is that the judge ruled that this prosecution witness, who's been referred to as BB, could not testify, and this was a potential witness who had been diagnosed with a condition that can result in too many platelets in his blood, and he had to carefully monitor it. So he had his blood drawn by Theranos a few times in 2015, but the results made him suspicious. The numbers were too high, and he went to see his doctor, and another laboratory also ran tests which put his platelet count in the normal range. So 4 days after his blood test, BB received an email from Theranos saying he may be having a medical emergency. He said that in the interview, he decided to stop getting Theranos tests and called the startup to complain, but never got a resolution. Ms. Holmes' lawyers actually successfully argued that BB shouldn't be allowed to testify about his experience because his particular test, the complete blood count, is not one of the blood tests that the prosecution has identified in the court document spelling out the alleged specific misrepresentations underlying the fraud counts against Ms. Holmes. So apparently the government had a little whoopsie-daisy and mixed up some test names because they wanted to include this one. So on Wednesday, attorney John Bostic said that the government had mistaken the test that BB had done for another blood test, a test for blood clotting that is included on the line of tests covered by the case. But because they made this mistake, pretty much his blood test is not technically included on what they're allowed to talk about. So this ruling actually kind of endangers one of the 12 charges brought against Ms. Holmes, a wire fraud count involving an October 2015 telephone call from patient BB to Theranos regarding laboratory blood test results. So we'll see what comes of this because he's not allowed to testify. So the next witness that prosecutors called was Chris Lucas, and he started on Thursday morning. And he is the nephew of Don Lucas, a well-known venture capitalist who was an early backer of Theranos and one-time chairman of the company's board of directors. So in 2013, his firm invested $5.4 million after an initial smaller investment in 2006. So the second investment underpins one of the wire fraud counts against Ms. Holmes. So she was also the main source of his information about Theranos, and his uncle kind of secondarily gave him some information. So they knew her and knew about Theranos from the very beginning. They frequently had meals together and knew each other socially, but he said that there was not a lot of transparency about what was going on in the company. Again, we get the questions about all the various inaccurate claims Theranos has made about its technology, partnerships, expansion plans, accuracy, etc. And, what was an important factor for investing. Each investor has gotten this list of questions so far, as I said, And once again, the Robert Parloff Fortune article was mentioned. Again, kind of showing that Elizabeth gave this article to a lot of investors and a lot of information in it was not accurate. So again, we have the idea that the lies and the misinformation and the reasons that a lot of people invested were because of things that she told them that weren't true. So at one point, Mr. Lucas is kind of testifying about the risk of his initial investment versus his later investment. And he talks about how the risk profiles were really different. So, in 2006, it's kind of an early stage and it's high risk because you have no idea what's going to happen with this company. But by the late stage in 2013, the risk goes down because you would hope that after 7 years, the company would have made some strides in technology. So Lucas testifies that it was very unusual to invest without getting full financials from a portfolio company, but he felt comfortable doing it with Theranos because of his personal connection with Elizabeth Holmes. Again, cross-examination tried to focus mostly on the lack of due diligence efforts. Downey, a lawyer for Holmes, tried to make the point that Lucas's rush to get into the late 2013 deal may have been to get in at a lower price, since Theranos was also planning another round of funding at a higher price the next year. And the defense also points out that Lucas got a 2.5% fee and 16% of the upside for investments he made on behalf of the Hall Group into Theranos. So again, talking about how he basically gets a commission for everyone else who invested, kind of trying to paint him as, someone the jury might not like, saying, look at him, he just wanted money. He was trying to get people in on this deal that he hadn't really researched. He was just in it for, the commission on their investment. But, who knows if that will work. It might be true that he was doing things for his own financial gain, but also, I think Theranos has proven itself to be more than capable of lying to people, so he was lied to as well. So the last witness of the day on Thursday only testified for about 30 minutes. And this was a Dr. Sawyer, who was that lab director who's working at the same time as Sonny's dermatologist, Mr. Dewan. So they were working in the same role, but they never spoke to each other. And Dr. Dewan didn't know Dr. Sawyer was working there, so it was a very bizarre situation. So Dr. Sawyer became co-director of the lab after Adam Rosendorf left, if you remember him from previous testimony. So apparently she was told nothing about his departure. She never went to a Theranos lab. She never knew anything about it developing its own tests, never heard of the Edison, Mini Lab, or any of Theranos' labs. She never met Elizabeth Holmes. She never met her co-lab director. And her job was basically to DocuSign documents that she had no ability to edit. She never got reports about lab activities. She only saw documents about FDA-approved tests on regular blood analyzers, and she had no understanding that Theranos was using its own devices on assays. So she testified that as time wore on, I grew increasingly uncomfortable in the way things were done, which, I would too if I had no information about anything. I was very uncomfortable with the lack of clarity about the lab. There was not even a person that she could reach out to talk about issues she had with the documents she was meant to sign off on. Apparently, when she gave her resignation to Sunny Balwani, she said that he tried to convince her to stay, and that was a little uncomfortable because he was a bit pushy about it. And Dr. Sawyer said she once asked him for a list of lab employees, but he didn't provide her with it. So she described her job as signing papers that were sent to her electronically. She was responsible for reviewing and approving laboratory standard operating procedures and test validations, but they were only related to tests done on the standard commercial analyzers. The role was essentially to sign documents, and she left after 6 months. One final thing I do want to mention here is that pattern the prosecution had of asking the same questions again and again, and those answers being repeated again and again, which is a definite strategy. This repetition kind of makes it easier for jurors to remember these things. And simply because of how the human brain works, if you hear something over and over again, you tend to believe it more or think it's true. So by having this repetition of questions and answers about Theranos wrongdoing, the prosecution is pretty much trying to, paint the picture for the jurors of this is how Theranos is, and pretty much just have these types of associations come to mind when they think of the company. We don't really think about how useful repetition is, but it can really help hammer home some of these points, and that's why, even though it might get a little tedious for us, that's why the prosecution is doing that same questioning again and again. I hope you guys enjoyed this update. If you'd like more in the future, subscribe to this channel because like I said, I'm doing a new one every Tuesday. Like this video if you liked it, and leave me any comments you might have down in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.